This week, I am joined by John Strand, who's back in the saddle. We're going to interview Jeremy Winter, the Director of Azure Management at Microsoft, to talk about Microsoft's Azure program. Then in the news, all kinds of fun stuff. We got StackPath launching Edge Engine. We've got a lot of vendors that I've never heard of before that I read about in prep for the show. Al-Qaeda is advancing cloud-native firewalls. Orcus is launching Access Governance for the cloud. I guess it's all about the cloud this week. Well, AWS reInvent is this week as well. Tufin is announcing a new cloud security solution and so much more. So stay tuned for all of that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs IncMan SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. IncMan SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see IncMan SOAR live in action. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live.
Welcome to episode 117 of Enterprise Security Weekly for November 28th, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. John Strand. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. This is 2 for 2. This is like some kind of record for the past 6 months.
It's awesome. It's nice to hear your voice, John. We were just talking before the show. You've been traveling for like 3 months, so looking forward to this show and to catching up after the shows. You know, we used to joke that like people thought John and I, spoke all the time. We get so busy.
I get meetings from you for like Security Weekly status updates, and they're like at 8:00 at night my time. It's like, what the hell are you doing?
It happens. So we get a webcast coming up with Chronicle. Of course, they're the Google company that is doing VirusTotal. We're going to be working with one of their fine people to deliver a webcast called Intelligence-Powered Malware Hunting. It's going to be held on December 5th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can go to securityweekly.com/chronicle and register today. So I'd like to introduce our guest, Jeremy Winter. He is the Director of Azure Management and responsible for areas such as Azure Governance, policy configuration, PowerShell, disaster recovery, and Azure Migrate, as well as other products in the Azure suite. You can, of course, go to azure.microsoft.com to learn more, but Jeremy's going to tell you all about it today. Jeremy, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
It's nice to have you, Jeremy. I want to first ask you, how long have you been working at Microsoft?
Yeah, good. I've been working at Microsoft for quite a few years. I think it's 21 now.
Wow. I find that when we speak with people from Microsoft on various topics such as Azure today, there's a lot of you folks that have been working at Microsoft, for most of, if not all of your careers, which just, that speaks volumes to me about an organization. Yeah.
I'd say, I think it's a mix for sure. There is quite a few of us that have been here a while. It's just, such a large corporation, centered around software, that it really gives us an opportunity to just really move around and try different areas. So
Yeah.
I've done everything from, I ran Hotmail from a service. I've worked on Windows and Windows security, and then came over onto the Azure side as we've really moved to the cloud platform and looked at how we brought enterprise capabilities into the cloud.
It's awesome.
So I can be here a while, but it's also, you kind of get to reinvent and move around quite a bit.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we're talking about Azure today, and I think that many that I speak with that are running Active Directory and managing Active Directory, they're like, oh, well, Microsoft, I think, wants us to move to Azure. How do we move to Azure? What is this Azure thing? If you're looking at your local, Active Directory and Exchange environment, give us kind of like some tips on how we move to this environment and what some of the benefits are, just at a high level to start.
Yeah, Active. When you think about it from an identity perspective, Active Directory clearly is one of those first places you start. And we've given the capability to run Active Directory, both here with your local Active Directory that you're used to running, and then the what we call Azure Active Directory. And that really helps kind of start that notion of your identity in the cloud. But what that's really setting you up for is thinking about a broader migration, or as you start to really go leverage the cloud, know that there's way more there now inside the cloud that's beyond just Active Directory, which may be how many people think about it. So we've really moved a ton of capabilities into the cloud. So as you migrate workloads that you may already have, as your companies already have, or as you start to really go modernize through this digital transition for your own company, with new ways of working in a DevOps, or new ways of running your, building new software, we have new security controls that really bridge between the IT and the developer, as well as you, the security professionals.
Yeah, it's interesting, how you frame that, Jeremy. I think that, so my experience, like when I started in 2001, I got to work with a really talented, Microsoft Windows administrator, and we were spinning up, hardware-based systems, some virtualization, but, the whole infrastructure was being built by hand. And as a security person, I was like, well, how do we build these? How do we deploy these? How do we secure these? And back then it was really hard. But now in Azure, I'm assuming we can take advantage of even some of those microservices or almost container-like functionality, and have a lot more flexibility in, do I need 2 Exchange servers? How do I back them up? And all those issues that we were dealing with, 15, 20 years ago, are largely a lot easier, right? Now that we have the Azure cloud to deploy into.
Yeah, I think for sure. And we've got a ton of capabilities that are just built into that cloud platform. So as you're starting to go down that path, you can just leverage what's in the platform. I think the key thing, is you mentioned, like, hey, we're out building the hardware and starting to go build out the deployments, and some were virtualized or not. As you move to the cloud, that whole goal is to help you just have the speed. Whether you want your business teams, you want your development teams just to be able to use the cloud directly and move quickly. So they're going to provision quickly. They're going to deploy through CI/CD pipelines and move that software right out in the environment fast. And so you want them to have that direct access. But with that, as you're talking, like, so how the heck do you control it? How do you start to think about, from a security perspective, how that balance comes into the equation? How do I think about compliance? How do I think about my security threats, while I couple that with the speed and this whole balance of speed and control? So this is, as we see it, as one of the key elements that we're coming at with Azure, and as we see this whole notion of CloudOps, is how do we go help this transformation, or this balance between that business, the security aspect, which is critical, and then your developers and that traditional IT.
So I got a quick question on that. One of the big things that a lot of our customers have been asking about for a long time, and I'd like to know the status of it, is advanced threat analytics for Active Directory and Azure. I know that you have some anomaly detection, behavioral analytics that's baked into Office 365. You can turn that on relatively easy. In fact, we have. with CloudOps security. But that component coming from a pen tester is so important for my customers and being able to detect the attacks that we're launching. Is that something that you think is getting baked in very well? Is it a little bit behind where you'd expect it to be? Where do you actually see that behavioral analytics component of this being incorporated into the Azure cloud, specifically for like Azure Active Directory?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So on the Active Directory side of the house, we definitely have all the logs and analytics that start to come in and allow you to start to see and look at that information with insights. One of the things that we have baked into Azure is Azure Security Center and this notion of Azure Log Analytics. And so natively inside Azure, we have the ability for this log analytics for all this information to come into a rich analytics system that can start to run what we call intelligence or smart machine learning on top of it. And so as a part of that analytics, much like you'd see with other vendors, we have this baked in, and now all the logs and information are able to come in. Why that's important to move beyond just an Active Directory log is that then allows you to go look across all the metrics that are coming in across the environment. What's changed? What threats are occurring? Does a new process start to hit? And how did that how is that associated back to identity? And so we've taken the log analytics, which is already connected to our Azure Security Center, and I'll get into that if we want to a little bit. I know Azure is kind of new for you guys, so willing to, we can go down the Azure security front. But with the Active Directory side, now those logs have been implemented and integrated right into that Azure Analytics, log analytics.
So you can take your Azure Active Directory, send the logs over to Azure Analytics. Is that correct? Yep. And then it can do that analysis and also cross-reference it across a number of other log sources.
Yep. So you see it from whether you're coming at it from the identity side or you're coming at it from the security center side or just the raw analytics. And this is how our own security teams are using the same technology, that analytics, to really get in and understand, put machine learning into that, and then go hunt and understand and respond to their threats.
So if you're running that security center, the Microsoft Security Center, and you're running Office 365, can you have that automatically integrate into that security center? Or would you want to be running like CloudOps security for Office 365 and the analytics platform in addition to each other? Like, how is that? Because many of the attack points that we go after are actually the Office 365 components. And I'm wondering, if a customer had to choose, is it possible to get it all in one in the security center? Or do they need to purchase two separate components to actually get that to work properly?
Yeah, right now, so from the Office side, we do have M365 and the entire security spectrum that comes with the M365 suite, and that gives you the end-to-end view of what's going on from your Office side. Now, as a part of that Azure Security Center and the threats that come from the same technology is baked into the Office 365 and M365 security and security graph. Now, from the Azure specific, those Azure workloads, we have you come over and use directly inside Azure. So you use the Azure tool sets, but they are starting to be connected, and the signals and telemetry are starting to be connected between your Office 365 and your Azure through the graph.
And that's so huge. Like, so many of our customers, they have the Azure logs, they have the Office 365 logs. And if we gain access to one that doesn't necessarily have that type of analytics, then it gives us free reign where they may have those analytics, but now it's blind. So if you guys are moving to that point where they're integrating more tightly, I think that's a great movement.
Yeah, and Paul, that's really where, as I said, you have the 365 side, you've got the Azure side, but the technology we've been building is shared between. You're starting to see them come in and get connected, and that's that log analytics aspect, especially with just the recent announcement we did just a month ago on bringing in all the AD information and shared information that log in that analytics platform.
So I got a question with you in
closer for you.
As you're setting this up, you stand up like something new like Azure, and it's relatively new. If we're looking at like the 25-year life cycle for a lot of these technologies, is it a hell of a task to try to tie all of these different log sources together into a centralized place and actually make that work? I think it's a much more difficult problem for a vendor, even somebody the size of Microsoft, than many people would expect it to be.
I mean, you have many different sources, just as you would have in your own environment. You have many different sources, many different teams doing it. I think the benefit we have is we're able to go really bet on this analytics platform and go work across all the teams to make sure those sources and signals are driven in there. And it just takes us time. We've done this in the past, even with our monitoring. If you remember back in the System Center days with SCOM and how we think about even how we monitored, we'd have management packs for Exchange and SharePoint and Windows Server and SQL. And it's just working across each of those teams to bring those signals in. But also we have vendors and partners that help in the ecosystem that'll go create those same signals. I think the one piece at Microsoft and Azure, we always come at this from both a solutions perspective and a platform perspective. It's just that platform aspect's just ingrained in the Microsoft DNA. And so we're able to, as we go build that analytics and the security, we think about it as a platform way. So it's pluggable by many other teams inside Microsoft, and then as well when we expose it out to the partners.
Cool.
So that's how we address that.
So that integration, I think, is key. And I think a lot of people mistakenly believe that if they're moving to something like Azure, that they got to learn absolutely everything from the ground up all over again. And I don't think a lot of people understand that there's things like Azure CLI, which is amazing, Azure PowerShell, Azure.net, and actually a lot of the skills that they've already developed as far as just standard PowerShell skills are very, very cleanly transferable over to the Azure framework.
Yeah. And that's just key to us. I mean, I have the PowerShell. The PowerShell team is one of the areas that my teams invest in. And we've done a lot of work to make PowerShell open source so that we're bringing that into the open source community, expanding it beyond just your traditional Windows environments. But the whole goal and why we ported that in CloudShell with PowerShell is so that the enterprise admins that are used to using PowerShell can just use it natively onto the core platform for however you need to manage or configure. But we've also extended CloudShell for Python as an example, just to make sure we're hitting our customer base that uses those as well. So from an Azure perspective, truly is an open platform.
Well, and just to kind of a shout out, once again, I want to say thank you on behalf of the community. I mean, the fact that I can sit down at a Linux computer system and do apt-get or apt-get install and put in Azure CLI is just like mind-blowing. And it's just an incredibly powerful set of tools. So keep up the good work there.
Yeah, thanks.
Jeremy, I want to ask you about the configuration management specifically. And I think one thing that we've talked about in our shows and John's experience on his pen test, right, is that when you're trying to manage Active Directory as an example, there's so many different configuration points and so many areas of concern that you might have that have to be properly configured to have some integrity across AD. How is that transferred into Azure, and how is that better basically in Azure with the tools available to manage your infrastructure, even all the other pieces as well inside of the Azure cloud?
Yeah, so on the AD front, let's start with the Active Directory side. We've brought the tools that you're used to using into Azure so that you have those same configuration capabilities there. And that was really just for us to be able to provide consistency. Yet by using Azure AD, you also don't have to, you no longer are running that AD environment to save you a bunch of time just in having to go manage it. But configuration, as you mentioned, as you think about it as the other resources in Azure, that's where we see a real big need from the enterprise space is how do I go configure or even govern or audit the configurations of environments that I set up. And so for us to do that in Azure, one of the key things we talked about we launched last spring and has been globally available for a while is this notion called Azure Policy. And what Azure Policy is underneath core Azure is this notion of the Azure Resource Manager. It is the control plane of all Azure resources. So we baked natively into the Azure Resource Manager the ability for you to set policies or define policies, whether you're from the security perspective or in collaboration with the IT team or even with the development teams. You can set policies that will audit and remediate specific configuration settings that you care about. Now that may mean a configuration setting like I only want the applications in this space to be deployed in a certain region like Eastern US or Western Europe. It may mean you want to get in and say, look, I want a very specific policy that says when when this application makes it to production, I want to ensure that remote debugging is turned off. So you limit your security exposure. Or specific network settings that you want to have for how your network is configured back and forth between your hybrid environment on Azure and back to the on-premises. All of those can be enforced through policy at a resource level, and it's natively baked into the ARM API or that control plane. Why that is so important to be in the ARM control plane is instead of layering that on with some other third-party solution, is if your developer or solution that you may have built yourself, if your developers are running directly against the API set and everything is done programmatically, you still want to make sure that if they go create a new environment or change a configuration of the environment, you're able to flag it without having, right at the native platform level. So that's why we've done that, and it's been immensely popular. And I got to tell you, it's been pretty cool to be able to sit down with large organizations, financial organizations, governments, and see the security side of the house sitting down at the table with the IT side of the house and the development side of the house, all having a real great conversation and being able to look at how they use this. And we've seen it applied to, they start using it within a few weeks, check it out, and then their entire resources are covered. 90% of them are covered within weeks.
So that's one of the things that we've kind of started doing with vendors and people that come on. Is there like a specific story? And I know you can't mention customer names, we get that, but is there a specific story that just sticks with you? Like you went in, worked with a customer, and the outcome was absolutely fantastic in that specific regard?
Yeah, we actually had, there's a handful that come to mind. I actually had one of them on stage with me at Ignite, and it was just really a change for completely how they thought about their entire environment. And what I liked about this is what I liked about this large company is can't say the name. I just want to. I think I can because they were on stage with me, but I'll let you guys go look on stage at that one.
Is that presentation online? Can we just search the name of the presentation in Ignite, or are those not recorded and shared out?
No,
publicly?
it is. My session's recorded on Ignite.
Okay.
And just look up Azure Security and Management. You kind of go in and see the entire breadth of what we've got for management and security. But here, back to your point, Paul, the thing that was really, I think, that we really, really loved, and the two teams between this company and us were, not only did we look at how policy could be used and the Azure platform itself, but then it started to go change how they thought about their subscriptions and the way they managed the organizations against the subscriptions. It brought in not only the configuration of policies, but it then started to expose the ability for us to go do this notion called blueprints. And so what happened there is we started to see that the company itself, they would go spend time with their business teams, and they would need to architect from a security point of view a set of configurations that they would need applied across very specific subscriptions in the cloud. And so we came up with this notion called the blueprint, which allows you to go spend the time to build these, and then they're repeatable and can be laid down to give the guardrails across that environment. And so what that did is it took us hand in hand with this company. It transformed how they approach the cloud from a security and governance and architecture point of view. It changed the way they actually think about working in their business teams. So it helped start to evolve the organizations. But then it also helped us as we went hand in hand and just worked with them to go identify not only improvements we want to do with the policies and security elements, but it helped us then come in and look at this notion called blueprint. We're going to see this, and we'd go out to other large customers and see the same ask when we started to validate and test that. So then we rolled forward with the blueprints. And so now you not only have policy, but you can then take this blueprint and lay that down in a stamp, or stamp it down on subscriptions whenever you need them created, and you have it in a repeatable way. So they didn't only transform themselves, but they transformed us and a lot of the innovation we're doing hand to hand with them.
So blueprints is like you're creating your template, right? And then policy makes sure that you stay within certain guidelines, correct?
Yeah, a blueprint, when you think about a blueprint, Paul, it's where you would sit down and think about what do you need for the subscriptions? What do you think about RBAC? What accounts do you want to have access to that environment? What are some of the software you may want to lay down, including with it other services that you want just repeatable every time like this? You may want to have log analytics or automatically applied to that environment. So you're having all the security logs coming in. You may want Security Center and update management applied to it as well. So you have the updates, and then you just can lay that down with the right policies already in place. And they're versionable, they're repeatable. So if a new team comes up from a security perspective and you need to approve that the subscription is created, just create the subscription and you know your security blueprint is laid down and you're good to go. And the team is off to run them on their own, and you can rest assured they have the guardrails in place that you need on the security side.
Jeremy, how do you deal with the situation, obviously being Microsoft, having a long history in technology, there's a lot of legacy applications out there, and not ones by Microsoft, but ones that are written by your customers, right? What are some of the ways that you're helping customers today to migrate off of those legacy applications or move legacy applications into the Azure cloud as kind of that first step to modernizing some of their applications?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from the migration point of view, we have a variety of different paths. I mean, migration is not an easy task when you think about it from the variety of different applications that are in the environment. And you also need to think through at the time from a customer perspective, are you wanting to just get out of a data center quickly? Are you wanting to move existing or traditional apps over as is? Or do you want to start to refactor using some of the microservices or containers? And so we have consultants as well as teams here at Microsoft that will go in with the accounts and spend time with them to really go first, just understand the situation and what they want to do. From my perspective, the tools that we provide, we build first-party tools that really just go help work through those phases. First phase is usually an assessment that goes in and just discovers the environment and helps them go understand what's in there. So we have tools that our teams provide, first-party free. You just that go and discover VMware environments, discover Hyper-V environments, and really just help you discover what's in there, see the dependencies that are there, and then also do an assessment of things for cost savings that you can get by running on Azure, and what the right configurations are. Sometimes we can look at the performance history of the workloads. And you may have a really heavy or underutilized set of virtualized machines or physical machines. You don't need that same size and that same amount of processing power once you move to Azure. And so we'd like to right size on that move. So discovery and assessment, first one. The second set that we have are tools that actually help you do the migration itself. And so we have two main tools we provide. Is the database migration service, so we can come in and move databases to the environment. And then we also have server migration through what we call Azure Site Recovery. That allows you to choose either downtime moves or real-time moves to actually move the actual Windows or Linux servers onto Azure. And then from there, we have cost optimization and all the management security tools that you can apply once they get onto Azure. But what we saw as well is the blueprints themselves started to be used, and we're really looking as customers go build those subscriptions, they want to make sure they apply the right policies and blueprints. So we've also started to see working with customers that they want to apply these blueprints and policies even at the time of creating the subscription. So as they move things to the cloud, they know they've got the right configuration and security aspects done ahead of time. So
you mentioned containers, Jeremy. So if I've got a .NET application as an example, can I then use Microsoft tools to help me migrate that into a container that would live on Azure?
Yeah, right now we don't have a set of tools that really, and there's very few out there if you think about the industry that can take an app and just completely package it up and have it run, say, on Kubernetes.
Right.
We do. I mean, I think we're still watching, but there's changes you want to go do to the app and fix up to the app that you want to do as you move to that containerized world. And so there are some tools and partners that are out there doing it. We're really helping that ecosystem. Where we're focused is making sure from the development side, up in the .NET or in the Visual Studio pipeline, how we help customers start to get ready for containers. And then we have Azure Kubernetes. The Azure Kubernetes service is just growing phenomenal inside Azure. We're seeing everyone just really jump to that direction on what we call AKS. And so we make sure that we have the Azure side, that we have the ability for you to go build those containers. And we've got some seamless ways for you to go make sure you're doing the deployments. But we're expecting right now that they're new deployments, or that you've taken the code base and then you're deploying as a container versus some fix-up automatically go move over. So that's the approach we've been taking. And it's still early in the container space, but that seems to be where we see a majority of our customers wanting to spend the time to do some refactoring of the apps when they move to containers.
Yeah, because I think a lot of folks that I speak with, right, have that situation where they've got that legacy app running on a legacy operating system, and they're like, it's like, 6 months or a year or more before we like rewrite the whole thing. What can we do in the meantime? If you can get it on a more secure platform, that's a great step in the right direction. The app might still be vulnerable, but then, that's going to take time to rewrite as well. But I think there's some wins in there.
And we can do that by moving it to the core IaaS platform of Azure, and that can be done, easy with the tools we have. Getting it in the container is, if you have the app and the deployment packaging, then you just deploy it yourself directly into say our Kubernetes environment or our Windows container environments.
Yeah, and then what I find from there is then you start to say, well, now this app is one container. Now it can be multiple containers, and I can apply policies, and I can split my workload. And they see the benefit the more they start working with containers.
Yep. And again, the policies and the configuration management we have, all the management tools that are there, apply both in the IaaS world as well as start to go into the fleet of containers that are there. So we've made it a priority across our security solutions as well as our management solutions that we are always thinking Linux and Linux first, as well as then making sure that it's able to handle the modern container environment.
I've got to ask you a question though. I have to ask you. Jason Fossen is the SANS instructor for Windows security at SANS, and he has this amazing quote where he says the vast majority of his class is showing people the cool things that you can do with Microsoft that you don't need another vendor to actually do. Are there a number of times where you see a vendor come up and they say, "Hey, look at this new thing we do," and you're like, "Damn it. That is something we've had for the past year, and they can absolutely do it without having to go and buy a third party to actually incorporate that."
Yeah, I mean, it happens. It's quite a bit. I mean, Microsoft is so large, and I think especially when you look at the amount of innovation that's happening inside Azure itself, from the security to the work we're doing with policy and blueprints to management groups, to even what we have down in how encryption occurs or our new firewall capabilities and DDoS, it's just so fast and furious that I think it is tough for the customer to see everything that's in the platform until they go really spend the time with Azure. But again, with us, it's also really important. It's kind of this balance that I look at, and I'll tell my teams, like, we have to go continue to support other tool sets. My monitoring teams, we need tools like Splunk or New Relic to continue to be able to also be leveraged on the core platform. And so we spend a ton of time working with all of those partners because we also know that there's process and traditional relationships and trust that's already been within that existing environment. So we want to make sure you can use our tools or you can continue to use our ecosystems for tools as well. But there are some areas that I really think, I really believe should and need to be expected of the cloud platforms. And this is why Azure spent so much time building all these security capabilities, from the foundation of the physical environment all the way up to the software stack that is available. And then same on the management front. And I think it's just a tide that's going to shift and it's an expectation that we should start to, I believe, should be put on the cloud platforms.
Jeremy, if our audience wants to learn more about any of the Azure technologies, other than going to azure.microsoft.com, are there certain resources that you would recommend for our audience who are primarily enterprise security defenders?
Yeah, I think, from the core perspective, there's a great source out there. So Azure.com, it lists out all of the core capabilities and products. But there's also Azure, Microsoft Mechanics, which have just a plethora of videos and deep discussions where if you want to go hear from myself or Mark Rozinovich or any of the Active Directory teams or what's happening down in a specific area of interest, that gives you these great anywhere 5 to 15-minute snippets that you can really kind of understand the broad as well as the deep scenarios. And I think that's a real good opportunity for people to just go spend some time kind of wallowing through the different topics that are there. Again, Microsoft Mechanics, and that gives you kind of a deeper view into the tech that's out there.
It's awesome. John, any other questions? Oh, I think
No,
John
I'm
okay.
good. I just really appreciate you coming on. I think, just from the BHIS perspective, for the people that are listening in right now, if you're looking at moving your entire enterprise to something like Google or Office 365, from a tester's perspective, I cannot recommend Microsoft and what they're doing enough. When you're talking about the behavioral analytics modules and security center and all of those things, Microsoft is actually building this ecosystem with a concept of security in mind. Now, there's always going to be growing pains. There's always going to be vulnerabilities that pop up. But right now, BHIS is seriously considering moving all of our stuff over to Azure and to Microsoft, just simply because they give us the tools to try to lock these things down a lot more in a way that Google just doesn't seem to care about at the moment. So be sure to check it out. It is complicated, it is daunting, but dang it, this is where everything's headed. So get on the train.
Awesome. Jeremy, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. Sorry, did you have any closing thoughts?
I was going to say, John, Paul, I just appreciate the time. And I know that if you want any access into the teams and deeper conversations, we're more than happy to do it with you.
Awesome. We'll take you up on that. Jeremy, thank you so much for appearing on the show today.
Yeah, ever have a great day.
You too. With that, we'll take a short break, come back, talk about the enterprise security news for this week. Stay tuned.